Hello, happy believers. I will continue talking about Joseph here, just to go over what I already said. I think the account of Joseph's life in Genesis chapter 37 to 50 is a wonderful read and shows us what an extraordinary man of God he was, while also struggling with his human side. We can learn a lot from Joseph, and most people can relate to him. It is amazing how Joseph saw everything happening from God's perspective and how he lived that out. So let us look at how Joseph saw and dealt with what happened to him. It will be helpful if you read Genesis chapters 37 to 50, as I will be mentioning only the parts related to how Joseph dealt with his difficulties. Starting from chapter 37. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than his other sons. He made him a robe of many colours. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to mine. Do you intend to reign over us?" his brothers asked. "Will you actually rule us?" So they hated him even more because of his dream and his statements. Reflection. It is very obvious that Joseph was Israel's, Jacob's favourite son, and his other brothers were envious and jealous, even hating him, and full of resentment toward Joseph, as they could not even talk nicely to him. Then Joseph had two dreams, suggesting that his brothers would be bowing down before him. This made his brothers hate him even all the more. They plotted to kill Joseph, and only because his brother Reuben stepped in on Joseph's behalf and convinced his brothers to throw Joseph into the pit instead and to keep him alive. When Reuben was away, Midianites, traders, passed by. His brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. I heard it said before that Joseph got into all this trouble because he talked too much. If he had said less, things might have been different. Joseph was loved by his father and hated by his brothers. Joseph was rejected by his brothers, and they treated him like an enemy. His brothers threw Joseph into a pit and later sold him to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. They abandoned Joseph. They sold him off as a slave. Joseph's brothers gave the bloody robe to their father, suggesting Joseph was killed by wild animals. They lied, were two-faced, and had no regard for their father's feelings. All the while, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master, Potiphar. When Joseph's master, Potiphar, saw that the Lord was with him and made him prosper in all he did, Joseph found favour in his sight and became his personal attendant. Joseph was prosperous, reaching his potential, and found his purpose. Now, Joseph was well built and handsome, and after some time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused. One day, however, Joseph went into the house to attend to his work, and not a single household servant was inside. She grabbed Joseph by his cloak and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his cloak in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. So Potiphar's wife kept Joseph's cloak beside her until Joseph's master came home. Then she wrongly accused Joseph. Joseph's master took him and had him thrown into prison. Joseph was wrongly accused of making sexual advances towards Potiphar's wife. Joseph was sent to prison. Joseph interpreted both dreams of the prisoners and said to the cupbearer, "When it goes well for you, please remember me and show me kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, that he might bring me out of this prison." The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot all about him. Joseph helped the two prisoners, but they failed to remember and help him out when they were released. After 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, the interpretation, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my house, and all my people are to obey your commands. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Joseph reached his highest achievement and recognition career-wise. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's household." And the second son he named Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. And every nation came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe all over the earth. Joseph was held in great esteem throughout Egypt and every nation. 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. When his brothers arrived, they bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph remembered his dreams. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them as strangers and spoke harshly to them. Then they said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." They did not realize that Joseph understood them, since there was an interpreter between them. Joseph hurried out because he was moved to tears when he saw his brother Benjamin, and he went to a private room to weep. Then he washed his face and came back out, regaining his composure. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So none of them were with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard of it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am your brother Joseph. Is my father still alive?" And now, do not be distressed or be angry with yourselves that you sold me into this place, because it was to save lives before you. For the famine has covered the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without ploughing or harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve you as a remnant on the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God, who has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. And there I will provide for you, because there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you and your household and everything you own will come to destitution. Then Joseph threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin wept as they embraced. Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with them. All those belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt were 70 in all. Then Israel, Jacob, said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz, in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and told me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you. I will make you a multitude of peoples, and will give you this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. Then Joseph fell upon his father's face, wept over him, and kissed him when he died. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, What if Joseph bears a grudge? Then he will surely repay us for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent word to Joseph, saying, Before he died, your father commanded, This is what you are to say to Joseph. I beg you, please forgive the transgression and sin of your brothers, for they did you wrong. So now, Joseph, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. When the message came to him, Joseph wept. But Joseph replied, Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? As for you, what you intended against me for evil, God intended for good, in order to accomplish a day like this, to preserve the lives of many people. Therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. Reflection. Joseph knew he had made a life of abundance for himself through the goodness and grace of God, through all his difficulties. And finally, he came to a place where he could say, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's household. God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. It is this feeling of having arrived, and I suppose he had in many ways, but emotionally he had a lot of catching up to do. Joseph needed a lot of emotional healing from his past trauma, and it began when his 10 brothers arrived in Egypt, and there they were, bowing down before him. Then Joseph remembered his dream, and he was face to face with his traumatic past. Joseph's emotional healing journey is not mentioned, but we get a great hint of it in the following scripture, as each event involves Joseph being very emotional, weeping and crying. When Joseph first met his brothers, he treated them as strangers and spoke harshly to them. This is very understandable after how they treated him in the past. Joseph turned away and wept. He was hiding his hurt and pain from his brothers. Another time he was moved to tears, and he went to a private room to weep. Then he washed his face and came back out, regaining his composure. And another time Joseph turned away from them and wept. But this time he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household soon heard of it. It was as if he was crying uncontrollably, releasing all his past hurt and pain. He also threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin wept as they embraced. They had missed out on so many years of growing up together, and Benjamin would have heard what had really happened to his brother for the first time. Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept over them, and afterwards his brothers talked with them. When Joseph's father died, he fell on his father's face, wept over him and kissed him. Joseph would also be grieving the missed years of not having a father in his life. Joseph was so good and forgiving. His brothers could not believe that he would not bear a grudge. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph bears a grudge? Then he will surely repay us for all the evil that we did to him." But Joseph replied, "Do not be afraid. I am in the place of God. As for you, what you intended against me for evil, God intended for good, in order to accomplish a day like this, to preserve the lives of many people. Therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." Joseph shows, after all his difficulties and harsh treatment of his brothers, he found healing, compassion, and forgiveness towards his brothers. Next painting, very, very soon. Watch this space. Until then, remember, Joseph has a lot to teach us. If you enjoy the content, please like, subscribe, and share so we can all live our wonderful Catholic faith together in all its richness.